Well, hello, everybody. So, popping back in here to continue our 5-part live stream video series for Valentine's Day, which is, of course, today. So, happy Valentine's Day. I hope that you are going to have if not a romantic time per se, but that you are going to have a day that honors the love within yourself. And the love that is all around you, and that you are able to open up and to see and to witness and to receive that today. So today we are continuing our it's kind of an FAQ series, just answering commonly asked questions in this series here today. And so just to give you some background, so far we've covered several questions. So how can you tell if your partner is telling the truth? Is there a right time to start having sex? How do I spot red flags, and can they be overcome? And today we're going to talk about how can an empath heal insecure attachment. And tomorrow we're going to talk about how does attachment relate to the law of attraction. So in this video here today, I am going to discuss a definition for empathy. We're going to take a look at this wonderful woman, Karla McLaren's 6 essential aspects of empathy model. We're also going to look at how to harness your empathic powers using improved communication, radical self-prioritization, and also a reframing of generosity. Okay. And so if you don't know me, my name is Brianna McWilliam, and I am an author, educator, Reiki practitioner, and I'm also a licensed and board certified creative arts therapist. And I've been in the field for about 13 years now. And I'm just wild about attachment theory and applying it to psycho-spiritual approaches in creative arts interventions to help adults that are feeling fearful or stuck in their romantic relationships really achieve a sense of what I call self-sovereignty in calling in the kinds of soul-shaking partnerships that they really want without necessarily having to talk in circles around their feelings for hours or even years on end with no real tangible result. And so I'm really stoked to dive into today's question. Again, that is, how can an empath heal insecure attachment? And so first, I would say that while a lot of research examines the problems that anxiety can create in relationships, there are also tremendous skills and abilities that evolve out of insecure attachment. And I'm going to be talking primarily about the open heart today. I refer to individuals with anxious attachment as open hearts. Because for the open heart, I would say there's probably 2 major strengths in particular that they can draw upon to help cultivate a healthy relationship. And those are empathy and generosity. And so before you decide that you already know what empathy and generosity is, I invite you to stick with me because I'm going to talk about some of the misconceptions around these things. So first, let's dive into empathy and take a look at a definition for empathy. So empathy is really the art of stepping into somebody else's shoes, having the ability to take a look at something from somebody else's perspective and really feel the way that that person feels. And so if we're going to take a look at this more neurologically, mirror neurons in the brain are what we think of as our smart cells. They allow us to understand other people's actions, their intentions, and their feelings. And those tend to fire when we experience emotion. And similarly, when other people are experiencing emotions like happiness, fear, anger, or sadness. Okay. And so those mirror neurons help us to be empathic and to what's called attune to other people. We kind of tune to their frequency. And so if you have empathy, if you feel that you have empathy, that is actually a considerable strength. So you may readily identify with other people's situations and you can see things from their perspective. You probably find it relatively easy to put yourself in someone else's shoes and appreciate not only what people are saying, but also what they are feeling and also how and why they are saying it. And so that gives you a tremendous perceptual ability. You can also tremendous ability to predict things, right? And so you may also have a very analytical mind as well. You have a keen interest in understanding what makes people tick, their underlying motivations and desires, and you may have kind of an implicit understanding of those things. So when this is what empathy might sound like when it shows up. So I know my partner feels vulnerable and scared, even if they're acting immature and angry. Because I know that they had a difficult childhood, I tend to put myself in that situation and I appreciate what they're really going through. So this is kind of like in a relationship when you find yourself becoming like the translator for your partner, right? Sometimes that happens. Our partners may be a bit, I don't know what the word is, unpalatable to people. And so then you end up translating what it is that they really mean for someone. Or I find myself automatically sensing what my partner is feeling, and I'm fascinated by what makes people tick in general. I will probe to understand more, and I find it really easy to see the world through somebody else's eyes. Okay. Now, for the open heart, they may find and or tend to feel that this kind of empathy gets them into trouble, and that it softens, weakens, or even destroys their personal boundaries in love. Because if they empathize too deeply with the struggles of their partners, too often they slip into deprioritizing their own needs and desires. Okay. And so I want to touch upon Karla McLaren's work, who talks a lot about empathy and the difference between empathy and enmeshment. And so Karla McLaren describes the perspective of an empathic open heart like this. Empathy means that you agree with me, that you support me, that you feel my emotions alongside me, and that you meet my needs even if I don't have to articulate them. When you do that, we are empathizing, and that is empathic. But the thing that I want to point out here is that's not empathy. That's enmeshment. Okay? Because it dismisses the individuality of the other person and of yourself. And it perceives any disagreement or contrast between you, including a boundary, as being unempathic or an abandonment of the relationship. And so when people are feeling the emotions of others inside their own bodies, or it could even be to the extent that they don't actually know what emotion it is or whose emotion it is, or is it them feeling this emotion or someone else feeling this emotion, that's really more of a form of enmeshment. Okay. So McLaren offers what she calls 6 essential aspects of empathy. It's a model that she has so that you can start to understand some of the dimensions of that. And again, this is from Karla McLaren. You can check out her website, karlamclaren.com. It's really, if you feel like you fall into this category, it's a wonderful website to investigate. So her first element is emotion contagion. So before empathy can take place, you need to sense that an emotion is occurring. Okay. Secondly, empathic accuracy. So that's your ability to accurately identify and understand emotional states and the intentions of both yourself and other people. Then there's emotional regulation. So in order to be effectively empathic, you have to develop an ability to clearly identify and regulate your own emotions so that you can start to sift through and organize what you are experiencing. Then there's perspective taking. So that is a skill that helps you imaginatively put yourself in the place of others and see situations through their eyes, okay? And also accurately sense what it is that they may be feeling. Then number 5, we have concern for others. So empathy ideally helps you connect with others, and the quality of your response to that connection, however, means that you have an ability to also care about others as well. Okay. And then there's also perceptive engagement. So perceptive engagement is considered kind of like the pinnacle of empathic skill because it combines your capacity to sense and accurately identify emotions in others, regulate your own emotions, take the perspective of others, focus on them with care and concern, and then do something skillful based on those perceptions. Not self-sabotaging or self-abandoning, okay? You want to emphasize that. So altogether, it's not really empathy that's the problem. It's an inability to distinguish between what is empathic and what is actually enmeshment, okay? So boundaries are actually essential to being effectively empathic, okay? So when it is enmeshment, you kind of have this habit of giving everything over to someone else and there's just nothing left for yourself. Okay. And that's largely because of 2 reasons. Number 1, firm but flexible emotional boundaries have not been properly modeled or established. So it's difficult to really have a sense of solid self inside. And there are also a lot of limiting beliefs around selfishness and selflessness. Those things have been kind of internalized. Okay, so for example, someone in one of my private Facebook groups offered this as an example. My problem is that I'm conflicted about what to do with information. How long before I confront my partner? Should I just be patient with them? Should I walk away? Is it even that big of a deal? Most of the time I'm patient and I wait around until somehow I self-sabotage because my overthinking is just getting the best of me. So if you feel like you're an open heart and you have empathic ability, or you have this, any of these 6 elements that we just talked about, there may be a sense of what's called omnipotence, but you may think, oh my God, I've got all this information and perception and I know exactly what's going on here. And then you feel like it's almost like you have a burden of control, like I'm in control of the outcomes of this relationship. But that becomes an inflated perspective. Okay. And so then we become preoccupied with strategizing and the mechanisms of control. And that actually pulls you out from your center and you're not really fully seated in yourself anymore. So for today, let's just focus on how to harness empathic powers. And I believe it can be accomplished in 3 ways. And that is through improved communication, radical self-prioritization with self-care practices at the forefront of that. And thirdly, a reframing of what we understand to be generosity in a relationship. A lot of times we pride ourselves on being generous because we think that's an honorable way to be in relationship, but we usually have kind of a deficient definition of generosity. So let's dive in. So the first thing I want to talk about is improved communication. So let's start with that. So empathy allows for you to hear and respond to deep structure communications, or it certainly can allow you to, as opposed to what I call surface structure communications in relationships, because you're better able to pick up on nonverbal bids for contact. Okay. So deep structure communications are the essence of what someone is trying to communicate to you. It's what's called their affect. It's their energy. It's how they're holding it in their body. Whereas surface structure communications are really more the literal interpretation of the words. So it's essentially paying attention to the feelings versus paying attention to the information. Okay. So their expressions might be similar, but they have different connotations and there's a different emotional emphasis. So for example, if Sally says, I feel like you never listen to me, she really doesn't expect the word never to be taken literally. So the deep structure communication is just the frustration that she's feeling in that moment, and the word never emphasizes the frustration. However, her partner, let's say this is a heterosexual example, John, may take her literally, either because he misreads the communication because he's paying attention to the information she's giving him as opposed to the emotional expression, okay? Or he may read her frustration, but then takes it in as a criticism of his competency. And so he responds in a negative or unsupportive manner. Okay. And so when couples are really on the verge of arguing, you can tell this can turn into an argument very quickly. So when they're on the verge of arguing like this, they're generally misunderstanding each other. And unclear or unloving communications could be the biggest problem in relationships. So here are some examples of deep versus surface structure communications. So the deep structure so surface structure, we never go out. Well, the deep structure communication would be, I love you and I have fun with you and I would really love to spend more time with you. Can we make some time for that? Sounds very different. One is very judgy and one is much more authentic and open. Or here's another one, surface structure communication. You always ignore me. Well, the deep structure communication is, I am feeling unappreciated and a little unseen and unimportant, and I could really use a gesture of love from you right now. That would really fuel me right now. Okay. Or here's another one. I'm too tired. Well, the deep structure communication there might be, I feel a deep responsibility to our family and to my obligations, and it's just hard for me to attend to my own self-care and give myself some me time. So it's about taking ownership of what you're really feeling in that moment. Okay. And then being careful not to place whatever you are feeling in that moment on the shoulders of your partner. Here's another one. This house is always a mess. Well, the deep structure communication might be, I want to relax, but my environment accuses me of falling down on the job. And I feel a bit defeated and I'm worried that you are going to judge me for it when I really just need your support right now. Okay. So these are ways that you can start to think about what's the underlying deep structure communication here? What's the affect? What's the the real affectual, emotional communication that's being delivered. And I think if you are someone who feels as though you have some empathic ability, then you have an ability to tap into that and to be aware of what's actually being communicated, okay? Because a lot of the miscommunications and resentments that occur in relationships really stem from a way of relating to the world and everyone in it based on essential fears of being incompetent or being unworthy. And so surface structure communications are reflective of those fears. So why do we say, if that's the deep structure communication, why do we say the things that sound so critical? Well, because if you have a layer of criticism piled on top of it, then that feels like the vulnerable part that's actually having that feeling response is protected, because that critical part is concerned with control. That critical part is concerned with being in charge and staying on top so that that soft part doesn't feel exposed. But if we can actually share that softer part, then you'll find that your level of connection, even empathic connection with someone, actually can grow. And you actually create more space for people to show up authentically with their own boundaries. Okay. So for example, Sally might say, "You don't care about me." And John might respond, "Of course I care about you. That's my job. Why do you think I'm trying to fix this problem?" Okay. So John in that moment might reason that because he's preoccupied with solving a problem that will in some way benefit Sally, then she should know that he cares. He's demonstrating it. However, Sally perceives that response as a way to avoid giving her direct attention and caring and emotional support. And so she doesn't want to be his job. That sounds very obligatory and unromantic to her. And her comment, in turn, makes him feel incompetent and that she doesn't trust him to meet her needs. And so while both of them are trying to express themselves in the best ways that they know how, inevitably their wires misfire because we're relying on surface structure communication and because we are expecting the other person to express themselves in the same way that we do. Okay, so it's very important to be aware of perspective taking and improved communication. And if you have empathic ability, you have a wonderful in with this. Okay. So then the second thing we talked about was radical self-prioritization. And at the forefront of that is self-care. So sometimes open hearts, what I call anxiously attached individuals, can view empathy as a curse. They feel kind of pushed around by the emotions of others. But it's like any other superpower. If you learn how to wield it, then it can actually be something that works in your favor. Okay. And so in this case, that means that you got to put yourself first. Because remember, empathy doesn't work without boundaries. Empathy without boundaries is just enmeshment. Okay. And to establish those boundaries, you have to put yourself first. You have to engage in self-care practices. You have to be aware of what your preferences are and what it is that you really need and want. Okay. And you have to stick to it. You have to be your own self-advocate. So if you can turn that empathy in on yourself, for example, we're not saying don't be unempathic. We're saying turn that empathy in on yourself and embrace, what's commonly referred to as your wounded inner child, and view self-care as a absolute priority in your life. You're going to be able to turn some of that around. Okay. So instead of running on fumes all the time, now it's like you have a car that's properly gassed up. And that means that you can drive a lot farther, a lot faster, and you can get a lot more done. So empathic people tend to, I would say, resonate with the rescuer dynamic. And if you want to learn about the archetypes that I use for emotional boundaries, you can check out my playlist on that. It's called Boundaries. But they tend to identify with the rescuer dynamic when it comes to these emotional boundaries, which is to say that they often have a harsh inner critic. So rescuers tend to love partners that are badly behaved because that is how they learn to love the bad parts of themselves. They can't love it in themselves, but they could love it in their partner. And in doing so, they come out looking like they're on the high ground. They're in the high ground. They're on the very moral side of the fence. But because of that, just shows us that there's actually probably a deep internalized critic for the rescuer inside. Okay. Because they're trying so hard to rescue bad things around them, they must think there's bad things within them. And they're trying to salvage them by saving everyone around them. Okay. So the deep empathy that they have for others, it becomes kind of an overcompensation for the lack of empathy that they have for themselves. And so in any given moment, when you start to feel yourself being blown over, I would recommend that you stop doing what you're doing, take a moment, and just drop into your body and into your inner space and use whatever images work for you. Like, I call them anchoring images, but it could be a safe place. It could be a tree that exists within you and you're just dropping into its trunk. Your leaves are getting blown a little too hard and now you're just going to drop into your trunk for a minute. And really allow those empathic tentacles of yours to reach in and find that place inside of you that's always there, that is always providing you a sense of groundedness, centeredness, and resourcefulness. And to just listen and ask what it needs and commit to honoring that above anything or anybody else. Okay. And so if you haven't cultivated an awareness around a visual anchor inside of you, or finding a place like that inside your body or inside your inner world, I highly recommend that you do so. And you can check out my playlist on spirituality and attachment for some guided visualizations to help you do that. Okay. So this is a little, before we move on to generosity, which is the last part of this, I would have a little challenge for you. And that is, how can you use your empathy to attend to deep structure communications? So you might even just write out, like, what are some of the surface structure communications you have either given or received? And if you don't know what that looks like, just think of the most critical statements you've heard from a partner recently or in the past, if you're single. What were some of the most critical statements that you received, or blamey statements? And then take a look at those statements and imagine, what is the softer, vulnerable thing that is being communicated beneath that critical blamey statement? Okay. And then I would have you name, like, in those instances, where have you deprioritized your own self-care? And you thought that was you being empathic? When have you abandoned yourself because you thought that was like the honorable thing to do, and then ended up being completely drained? And what would you put in place today to honor yourself and prioritize your own self-care? Okay. So the last thing we're going to talk about today is generosity. And so when we think about generosity, most of us probably liken it to a form of compassion, or kindness, maybe gentleness or tenderness, or maybe even self-effacing. Okay. I am going to say that I think that is a big misconception. And because we have a tendency to align those things with weakness and strength, or a weakness rather than strength, right? And that's because we think of generosity in terms of giving something away to someone else, which is a form of honorable self-sacrifice. So all of this is layered on top of a belief that in order to be generous, it must be self-sacrificing. It must be at some cost to you in order for it to be of value. But generosity really generates its power not from self-abandonment or self-sacrifice, but from a gesture of letting go, of being able to give to others. The ability to give to others kind of demonstrates your ability to kind of let go of attachments, whether it's egoic or biological, that others tend to keep us imprisoned by a desire and a need for things to look like just so, or to be exactly just so. It's got to be this thing. Generosity is a loosening of that. It's a way of allowing that to kind of flow through you. So generosity is less about self-abandonment, and it's more about a form of releasing attachments to the idea that things have to be a certain way. And so while open hearts are no strangers to giving a lot, okay, they often kind of keep this invisible scorecard above their heads and hovering above their relationships. So some part of them really does give in order to get. And we see this in self-help, in the realms of self-help and personal development as well. If I can just fix myself, then they'll love me. If I can just do all these things to myself to improve myself, because I'm not good enough as I am, if I can just improve myself and learn all this information and blah, 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 then they will be inspired to come back. But you have to understand that all of that is still a form, all of that self-improvement, if that's your main goal, is still a form of self-abandonment. You see the paradox there? So there is, in essence, still a scorecard above your head. And then if you don't get back what it is that you are trying to put in, then you might get angry at a partner. But rather than express it to them, which you may on occasion, especially if you hit a threshold, but more often than not, you're going to take that anger and you're going to turn it in on yourself and become anxious and depressed. Okay, because if you were to be angry at them, that would threaten the relationship security. You would be afraid that that would push them away and might lead to rejection and or abandonment. So now you are anxious and depressed. Okay, and at the root of it is a lot of repressed anger. Be in resentment because you're giving in order to get. And so true generosity, it's really not about giving without expectation of receipt so much as it is giving with the understanding that it need not come from a place of scarcity to be of value. Okay. So when you give to get, it's because you think that you have depleted yourself in some way, or that you can be depleted in some way. And the measure of your sacrifice, the measure by which you deplete yourself, makes you worthy. Okay. But when you are fully sovereign within yourself, when you really fill up your own circumference, you know that life and love and all those abundances out there just flow through you, and that you have endless access and resources to that when you are in touch with your inner being. You're never depleted. And generosity comes from an expression of that non-attachment to the minutia of life. Okay. Now, it doesn't mean that generosity eradicates all attachment automatically. And it also doesn't mean that all attachments are necessarily bad. But when we practice the act of simply observing our attachments through whatever acts of generosity we can affect from a place of abundance as opposed to from a place of scarcity and self-abandonment, then those attachments tend to loosen their grip. They become less opaque or solid in our experience. And so in that place, we tend to find a greater spaciousness in our minds, in our life experience, because we're able to tap into a greater sense of inner resourcefulness. So rather than think, you can't have what's mine because that's all I have, you can try reframing it to say, you can take it because there is plenty where that came from. And I am happy to share it if it brings light and love and value to your life. The world is full of abundant possibilities for me because I know where and how to look, both inside and outside of myself. You know, this is not a bit to make a digression, but it's a bit of an example. I also do business coaching. And a lot of times individuals that come to me for business coaching, they're worried about, how much do I share? Are people going to steal my stuff? What if they this? What if they that? And I always give them a statement similar to this, intersections between love and money. What if they do take it? What if someone does steal your line? Well, they don't have endless resources. They took it from you, but you came up with that, which means that you've got plenty more where that came from. So you can let that go. And that's a generosity. And if nothing else, then you become more famous because of it, right? So I would say open hearts, or individuals that have empathy, they value generosity and they have a great capacity for it. And if that can come from a place of self-prioritization and self-care and establishing firm boundaries as a way to actually show up more authentically in the relationship, you can actually be much more empathic. You can tap into those deep structured communications a lot more effectively. And you're going to be able to be generous from a place of what I call self-sovereignty, but you could say from a place of endless resourcefulness, rather than from a place of self-sacrifice or self-abandonment. And I would say that it's also going to give you a witness to your own resiliency and inner resourcefulness. And once you do that, it's going to shift an attitude of scarcity in any relationship, because all insecure attachment stems from an attitude of scarcity. Okay, not worthy enough, not enough love in the world, not enough people in the world for me to connect and attach to. I have to cling to this thing no matter what, because this is the only way I can get it. Okay, so if you can amplify those capacities of empathy and generosity, I really believe in the true definitions of the word. I really believe that that can foster a sense of love for the self and the other, regardless of whether or not you're in a partnership at this time. Okay. So I would like to see in the comments below, if you are watching this either now or on the replay, how do you define empathy? Do you think that you are empathic, and what makes you think that way? What would you say is your biggest struggle with that? What is one thing that you could do to prioritize yourself today, right? And as a reminder, all of this is in support of a promotion I'm running this week on my 7-week signature course, Healing Attachment Wounds, which covers neuroscience, attachment theory, mindfulness-based practices, creative arts therapies, interventions to really help illuminate the struggles that you may be going through and help you step into a place of self-sovereignty in your relationships without having to talk in circles around your feelings for hours or even years on end with no tangible result. And so right now I'm offering it at 76% off. I'll put a link to that in the caption of this video. You can check it out. And as a reminder, tomorrow is our last day in this live stream series. So if you are posting questions and things like that here on the feed, I will make sure to check it out. All right. So let's see if we have some questions popping up now. We have James, Becky, Autism Enlightenment, Rebecca, Morgan, Becky, John, Sophia, and Micheline. Welcome. Thank you for coming and joining today. It's a blessing and a curse. Difficulties with regulation. Being too literal, being a surface communicator. Yeah, sometimes it's important to cultivate that awareness of what is going on underneath the surface structure communications, right? So if you ever hear, I mean, it's just kind of a signal to you. If you hear something that's blamey or criticizing or victimy, then realize that that is a voice that's actually speaking from a more deep structure place. And for the benefit of the relationship, if you can remove yourself personally for a second or assume that observer position in the relationship, you can probably more identify what the deep structure communication is. Can you leave a link for the empathic website? It's karlamclaren.com, KarlamClaren.com. She's really wonderful. Okay. Oh, thank you, Sophia. You and your channel have been invaluable. I'm so glad. This was very smart. I'm glad you enjoyed it. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for joining me. And tomorrow, again, is our last live stream. Oh, we have Viv. Hi, Viv. Empathic and struggle with not absorbing feelings, energies, and moods of others. Yes. And I would say if you're interested, I think part of that is also having cultivated a language and designed sort of like an inner map so that when you are feeling like you are taking on the moods, energy of others, that you can go into that map and navigate it, and it's embodied. So I had an experience with this, this week. I had someone who I felt really misinterpreted me and where I was coming from, and it felt awful. It felt awful because it was the way that they experienced what I had to say was so the opposite of anything I would ever want them to experience. And so like a deep sense of, I think it really stimulated shame for me. Like I felt like I said and I did something wrong, but it was this, like beneath that layer, there was also a lot about allowance and permission. Like you're not allowed to say or do things like that. And I realized that that there was something that was being disallowed, that they were disallowing for themselves, within themselves. And then coming to me, I'm also a law of attraction person, which we're going to talk about tomorrow. I felt, okay, so there's something within me that I'm not allowing or I am disallowing within myself. And in having that conversation, realizing that it was, to me, I took it as a sign about there's other facets of my life in which I'm not allowing for things. But I had to really go in and I had to meditate and I had to find that grounded place. And it wasn't just like one 15-minute activity and then I was done and great and good to go. I had to do it a couple of days in a row, and I had to do my own rituals for containing energy, because I think there is power and there's magic in being able to do that and work with the metaphors for containing things and moving them beyond. And within a week, I ended up having another conversation with this person, and we ended up clearing the air, and it actually ended up opening up probably a deeper space for learning between us. But it's interesting because when those moments happen, it's when we take something in, whatever it is, even if it is of somebody else, however we are responding to it is also information for us, like about ourselves. So I really feel like what we take in isn't just arbitrary, that there are things that we take in because there's something there for us. So part of it is a process of going in and sifting through that and figuring that part out. right? And again, so if that's something you're interested in looking at more experientially, you can check out my playlist on spirituality on YouTube on attachment and spirituality. I have a lot of guided activities and things to help you with that. I also have a playlist on boundaries that specifically goes through mental, emotional, physical, and I think it's sexual boundaries to help you also create ways of organizing that kind of content within you as well. We have Amanda looking at all the shadow sides of my open heart tendencies has been so liberating. Thank you. I'm glad you enjoy that. Okay. Do you think being sarcastic and facetious for the most part turns people off? You know, I have my own opinions about sarcasm and facetiousness. You know, some people, that is the way they communicate because it was hard to have sarcasm is, you know, it's a form of wit, but I think it's also oftentimes what people use when they are uncomfortable with emotionally honest conversations. So sarcasm is especially if it's sarcasm and trying to make someone laugh or something like that. It's a way of deflecting from the content of whatever's being expressed. Now, some people may use sarcasm as a way to, depending on how the conversation goes, it may be their way of communicating how they're really feeling because they don't have other language for it. So I'm not going to totally knock sarcasm. I think it depends on how it's delivered. But oftentimes, if it's used in place of more direct, emotionally direct communication, it's usually a deflection from something, either because we haven't been taught how to have emotionally honest conversations, or because whatever feelings the sarcasm is covering up, it's uncomfortable. We have Micheline. Oh, so Micheline has her own opinion about sarcasm. Okay. But yes. So I hope that answers some of your questions. We are at about the 40-minute mark, so I'm going to close out this video for today. But again, remember to come back and join me tomorrow, noon Eastern Standard Time will be our last day, and the last day to also purchase Healing Attachment Wounds for 76% off for this holiday week. So I hope you've enjoyed it. Any questions, again, you can comment below the videos, and tomorrow we will tackle a bunch of them, as well as the question, what is the relationship between attachment and the law of attraction? All right. Thank you, everybody.